Well, what do we mean by awakening? Well, by now it should be self-evident from what I've been describing, but when we use the word awakening, we're usually talking about trying to use a metaphor about, well, we're asleep and we wake up. And the truth is, sleeping, and I don't know what it is for you, but for sleeping and waking up, it's not an on-off switch. Sometimes I'm deeply asleep. Sometimes I'm lightly asleep. Sometimes I'm in a groggy state. Sometimes I'm okay. I'm with you. And other times I'm hyper attuned to what's going on. So even in waking up, there is a continuum, and I think we can all recognize that from our own lives. And so, but waking up, the metaphor of waking up is trying to go from a sense of I'm not aware. And when are we not aware? When we're immersed in the world of the multiplicity of life and the smallness of the stories of our lives, that's when we are asleep. But when we can shift and turn the dials up and be more and more awake, that's when we become more aware of our unity to all that is. Okay, so that's the path. So waking up is simply moving that dial and moving from one end to the other. Another metaphor that's often used is we were in the darkness and now we're in the light. We have become enlightened. And I got to tell you a story. When I was younger, I read a lot about enlightenment. And this is where, before I recognized we're this multiplicity of paths, I thought that I had to find the truth of enlightenment from what other people were talking about. And I would read these books and descriptions of people who meditated, and they had these wonderful cosmic consciousness experiences that they would write about. And I'd say, I want that. I want that experience. So in my 20s, I would sit on the meditation cushion, get up every morning, and sit there and meditate and meditate and meditate. And I would do it for weeks, and then I would get pissed off because I never got that enlightenment experience that I was reading about. And I would go, well, this stuff obviously doesn't work. And I would then stop meditating for a while. And then later I would get enthused about it, and I would go back to meditating. And then we'd try it for a while, and then stop and start and stop and start. I don't know how many of you relate to that. But I kept looking for that magical elixir, that one moment of that enlightened experience where I was just going to get that lightning bolt shot at me and I was going to know the truth. And what I've come to discover, and what I hope you all have discovered, and if not, I want to enlighten you about it, is that enlightenment, because we are the multiplicity of spirit experiencing life in so many different ways. Yes, there are some people who have those flash of illumined things and they go from a state of not aware to aware. They go from I thought I was separate and apart to I'm all one. Yes, people can do that quickly. But what I've discovered is the vast majority of us, it's like building a muscle or any kind of experience. The enlightenment process goes step by step by step. It takes you meditating, it takes you reading, it takes you having spiritual classes, it has you discussing with people who have spiritual awareness that you can glean things from. It is building up over time. And a minute ago, I said, remember how I felt like, well, my story of true self was Mark in his life. And then I thought maybe it was when I was trying to be my authentic self. And then where now I see it's the knowing the oneness. That was a step-by-step process of becoming enlightened. Now, I don't stand up here and say, oh, I'm some enlightened being that you got to listen to. But what I do want to recognize for myself, and I want everybody listening to these words to recognize for yourself, is that if you look at your life from where you were 10, 20, 30 years ago, go back in time and say, what was my spiritual belief and patterns then? And who am I now? And you look at the gap and then pat yourself on the back for becoming enlightened, because you are so much more enlightened than you were many, many years ago. Now, you might not sit here, just like I won't sit here and say, oh, I'm some enlightened being. But I can tell you, I'm much more enlightened than I was many, many years ago. But what that also opens us up is to a humbleness to recognize there's still more to go. And it's a continuous evolution. It's a continuous growth and development. If you ever encounter anyone, and I do encounter these people who call themselves gurus and enlightened beings, And that's fine and dandy for them. But I listen to that and I go, may be true, but I hope they're open to the fact that it's a continuous state of becoming and that there is no arrival. And if they may recognize, and when they call themselves enlightened, they're describing themselves from where they were previously to where they are now, but they're still growing. And I think if they get caught up in the hubris of thinking they've arrived and there's no more to learn, I think that's when we see a lot of these fallen spiritual teachers in all faiths and denominations that, we put them up on the pedestal for their enlightened teachings, and then they do things in the world of form that let us down. And we know who they are, and I'm not going to name them, but it happens so frequently because I think a lot of times it's easy to get caught in the trap of thinking you've arrived and then using that to extend power and control over others and so forth, which only shows you're not arrived. Because if you were there, you would recognize the unity and you wouldn't be misusing the unity, because then you're causing harm. So what is awakening? What is enlightenment? Enlightenment is a continuous state of moving from thinking you're separate and apart and in competition with everyone else who's separate and apart, to moving to greater and greater awarenesses of being unified in oneness with God. That's and it's a process. It's a continuous process that you're walking along. And it's not to say you don't slip up, because every day we're back to turning that vibratory dial up and down. I'm stuck on politic arguing. I'm living in bliss.